But yeah, we spend so many years internalizing and being like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me? I must be defective. I must be missing some sort of part of my brain, whatever. But then like getting that diagnosis and understanding that that's why you struggled so hard makes me, to me, that makes me go, oh, brain, you're awesome. Like you are really good at figuring out all those coping mechanisms and, really just doing the best you could as long as you could with not a full toolbox. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think having that diagnosis makes me a lot more forgiving of myself and allows me to embrace and put strategies in place that help my brain and that make me thrive and make me, support me.
Welcome to the Confident Mompreneur podcast, where you can find solid advice along with warm guidance on motherhood, business, relationships, health, wellness, and everything you need to help add to your confidence and zest for life. And with interesting guests from all around the world, you'll hear real and relatable stories with impact and nuggets of wisdom to help you or the mompreneur meet the challenges of life with clarity and success. Now let's welcome your mompreneur host, Carrie Blaney.
Well, welcome on today, Anna. I'm so excited to have you here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a great talk.
Yes, I'm so excited. We were just chatting for a little bit before, and she said some things that I'm like, heck yes, let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So I was like, okay, let's just go. Let's go for it. So, can you introduce yourself for those that don't know you a little bit about who you are, what you do, your family, all of the good things?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Anna Burns, and I own Anna Burns Wellness, and I am an ADHD coach for ADHD moms. And so I work with moms who have or suspect they have ADHD themselves, and really work on strategies and support and tools to try to make life easier as a mom. I live just outside of Boston. I've got a 4-year-old son, and yeah, so I originally was a pelvic floor physical therapist for many years. And then when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I went, oh my gosh, you get a diagnosis and they just kind of be like, all right, good luck. And so it took me, if I'm doing all this research and I'm doing all of this, I want to be, getting out there and telling other moms and getting them to realize that they don't always have to do things the same way as everybody else does.
I love that. And it's so interesting that, like, I always tell people that the best entrepreneurship journey is something that comes from like something that we're personally going through. And so we're digging in and trying to get the answers. And then we're really good about like sharing that knowledge and those things with other people too. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like moms are so good at sharing information. Like we all just want to help each other, right? Whether it's like, what diaper should I use? Or like, hey, I found this out about this thing in my life and I want to tell someone about it. So
yeah,
we're good sharers.
We are good. We're so good at it. And that's why we make such great entrepreneurs. I mean, we're just great at that. And I love that. So what was your journey like as you were fighting for your own ADHD diagnosis? And when did that come about?
Yeah. So things really came to a head for me after I had my son. I had him in May 2020. So remember that time. And
we don't say that word.
Yeah. That era.
That thing.
And I think just before that, I had started my own virtual PT practice because who knew when we were leaving again, right? Our own houses. So, and so I was starting a business and had a newborn and no support. And that's when I started really realizing that something was going on. I had been meeting weekly with my therapist, and I had, been in touch with my nurse practitioner who prescribes my, antidepressants and anti-anxiety. And I think it was like 18 months in, I just remember telling my therapist that I should be feeling better. Like I shouldn't be struggling this hard if I've got the right diagnosis and the proper treatment. Because it was just so hard to kind of be a new mom trying to now think for another human, And ADHD affects the part of the brain that does executive functioning. So that means things like organization, prioritization, planning, all that kind of stuff. And so when you're trying to do that for another human and you're already having trouble with it yourself, it's really frustrating. And then I think in terms of a business standpoint, it was tough because I had all these ideas and I would start things, but I couldn't finish them. Like I was really good at starting things, but follow through was not my jam. And I had never really figured out why. And so after talking to my sister, who herself was diagnosed late, after her son was diagnosed, she said, look into this. There might be something here, because she started describing some of the things that she went through. And I went, oh my gosh. And like, wow, that is my existence. And I hadn't, like, my experience, and I had never really figured that out. So I talked to my therapist, and it took a while for me to get officially diagnosed, because of all sorts of things like neuropsych testing, insurance, the pandemic, all that. So I didn't get my official diagnosis until probably like 9 months ago, when I was actually able to go into someone's office, take a test, and it proved that I do have ADHD, and I was able to get on to start some medication, which has helped a lot. But I think that there's a lot of moms out there who just think like, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do it the way everybody else does it? They make it look so easy. And I just remember thinking like, you know what? If everybody works as hard as I'm working in my brain, they wouldn't have more than one kid. So, what's like, I just felt like I was like a defective mom, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the long-winded version of how I came to be an ADHD coach.
That is so cool. And it's so interesting just like hearing you talk about, some of the things that you were struggling and the things that you were seeing. But also like that it took so long to get a diagnosis, just because I think there are some problems in our healthcare system where we don't necessarily feel listened to, especially as women. And especially because ADHD shows up differently in women than it does for men and boys, and boys are much higher to get diagnosed at early ages. And just like the fight that you have to go through to even get a diagnosis, to be able to kind of understand how your brain is working and get on the right medications and do all the things.
Exactly. And I think so many women are diagnosed and treated for anxiety and depression because it wasn't thought not that long ago that women didn't have ADHD. And so, but it's this mix of things where it's a really muddy diagnosis, because ADHD can cause anxiety because you're anxious about always being behind on everything and losing things and, not being on time and all that. It can cause depression because you are shaming yourself and guilting yourself and feeling like, oh my gosh, I should have done it that way. And, oh, why is this so hard? And, so it's this kind of cycle, where it is really hard to tease out in a way that I think, like you were saying, like the hyperactive boys, what's going on. I mean, there might be other things going on, but it's very clear that like ADHD is a piece of it. But this inattentive type that girls and women tend to present with just is not recognized as much by providers. So
yeah. Well, and did you notice it affecting you as you were going through like your schooling or those types of things too? Because obviously, like, you're a doctor, you went through a lot of schooling, and typically that's something that, like, my son has ADHD and he really struggles with school. But I feel like women with ADHD sometimes do better in those kind of environments.
yeah, I definitely remember, like, I started noticing things were a little funny with my brain, like when I went to college and I got tested, neuropsych testing. They're like, there's something a little abnormal going on in your brain, but, just drink coffee before you go to class and it'll be fine. So this was 1999, 2000. And so, I kind of made it through college. And then when I went to grad school, we were in lecture about 40 hours a week for a couple of years, which if you have ADHD is torture. but I did really, really struggle in physical therapy school because there was just so much to take in, so much knowledge to take in, so many different types of knowledge to bring in. And that there was kind of like a one size fits all teaching style. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't fit that. And so I really, really struggled. I mean, I did it somehow. But but it was definitely a challenge. And looking back, now that I've been out for 14 years, it's like, oh, that's exactly what was going on. I
Mm-hmm.
just didn't know the name. And how different of an experience it would have been had I known that was a piece of the puzzle and being able to
Yeah.
work with it correctly.
Yeah, that's so true. I look back on college and I struggled and struggled and struggled, and then I finally got into the things that I like actually was interested in and kind of like would hyperfixate on, and I did great, and it was awesome.
Yes, exactly. Like our ADHD brains, like we love being stimulated. And so if we're interested in something, we are going to eat that up. But as soon as it's not, and you're doing like one of those classes that you have to do in order like to fill requirements, those are like the worst because
Oh,
your
yeah.
brain is just like, I'm not interested and I'm not going to actually listen to any of this.
Yeah. I was like listening through your description of some of the signs and things of ADHD in women, and I'm like, huh, yeah, this all sounds super familiar. I've always been that person that like I will start a million things and I'm great at like just like following through and doing it. But then like the moment I get bored with it, it's like, goodbye, on to the next. And it's like, just one of those things that I've struggled with my entire life. And it is one of those things where you like recognize that you have maybe those patterns or tendencies or things in life, and then you start to shame yourself, like, why can't I follow through? Why do I never do this? And that's where the, shame really digs deep and the depression and things come in.
Exactly. And I think for me, at least, getting a diagnosis was my path to self-compassion and my ability to forgive myself, to give myself grace, to laugh at myself because really I do some ridiculous things because of my ADHD. So, but yeah, we spend so many years internalizing and being like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me? I must be defective. I must be missing some sort of part of my brain, whatever. But then like getting that diagnosis and understanding that that's why you struggled so hard makes me, to me, that makes me go, oh, brain, you're awesome. Like you are really good at figuring out all those coping mechanisms and, really just doing the best you could as long as you could with not a full toolbox. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think having that diagnosis makes me a lot more forgiving of myself and allows me to embrace and put strategies in place that help my brain and that make me thrive and make me, support me.
Yeah.
So that was a big turning point for me.
So, do you believe like a diagnosis is something that you should get if you're like listening to our conversation and you're like, "Oh yeah, a lot of these things fit what I'm going through or how I kind of function in life." Do you think a diagnosis is something that we should go and do, or do you think just the recognition maybe of like that's how our brain works and then being able to like be like, "Okay, walk back. How can I actually work with this, regardless of whether I have the actual diagnosis or not?"
Yeah. And it really varies for people. Like for me, the diagnosis was really helpful, because I needed I needed to understand that there was this missing piece all along and I know what it is now.
Sometimes that
And
validation is just enough.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too, and obviously in order to get medication, you need testing, you need a diagnosis. So I think that's really helpful. Also, if you are going to, submit for any type of accommodations at work, or something like that, you need the diagnosis. Some people don't need the diagnosis. They know what's going on. They're not interested in medication. They're not interested in, pursuing some sort of ongoing treatment for it. And so sometimes just learning the strategies and understanding the ADHD brain, which I think is a huge piece of this. Like once you understand what's going on, then you can start, making those changes into your, your structure, your life. So I think it really depends. I think too, though, getting a diagnosis also gives quote unquote the system more data in terms of like, hey, how many more women are now being diagnosed? Wow, this is a bigger problem than we thought it was. Now, how can we do research and support these women better? Because very, very little research has been done on ADHD in women. So.
Yeah, that's really good points. But for those that maybe are like, okay, I either already have a diagnosis or, maybe I don't want to get a diagnosis. I don't really feel like meds is a good option or whatever. What do you think that they should know about the brain and how it's working and how we can build those systems in to, kind of create success in all the different areas of our life?
Yeah, so I think knowing which parts of the brain ADHD affects is really helpful. So if you know, like, okay, it affects executive function, and these are all the things like working memory and all the stuff I mentioned before, then you start to say, okay, if I know that there's a reason my memory isn't great, how can I best support that? Do I need to ask for repetition? Do I need to write things down? Like, then you can start figuring out strategies. Another big piece of ADHD too is what's called emotional dysregulation. And so I think a lot of us can relate to that, where you just like fly off the handle at the smallest thing and people go, oh, you're overreacting. You're too sensitive. And it's because the part of the brain with ADHD that makes emotion is really hyperactive and makes lots of emotion, lots of very strong emotion. But the part of the brain that goes, hey, now, how much is actually appropriate is like offline. And so you've got lots and lots and lots of emotions and no gatekeeper. So just understanding even that can be helpful when you're in that moment. I call it like the witching hour, right? Where, okay, it's dinner time. People are hangry. You still have work to do. They're coming home, from work or from school or whatnot. And then someone just like says something and you fly off the handle and you're just like, but to understand, like, what do I need to put in place for myself before I get to that place? Is one of the strategies that I work with my clients on, is just figuring out how, if you know how your brain works, then you backtrack and kind of say, all right, what support systems do I need to put in place to help me not get to that point?
Yeah,
So
I love that. You said something before we hopped on here about wanting people to understand how pregnancy and having kids can impact that too. How does that impact our brains and how everything's working?
yeah, so hormones do influence ADHD symptoms. They usually exacerbate them. So we tend to see like people getting diagnosed, cycling people getting diagnosed, puberty, childbirth, because now maybe the symptoms that we've been able to manage for so long are now getting severe enough that we can't. Perimenopause and menopause, again, are bumps. Some women even feel experience differences in their ADHD symptoms according to their cycle. And so just understanding that I never had ADHD before, and now all of a sudden I had kids. It's not like all of a sudden you got ADHD. It's that your symptoms got to a threshold where you are no longer able to cope around it. And then it became a very problematic, bothersome thing that you need to go, get support around.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's such an interesting conversation to have because, women go through these pregnancies where our bodies are literally going through massive changes. And then we expect to just like walk out of it and be the exact same person that we were before. But like you said, it changes everything and it exacerbates the things that were already there, but maybe kind of like hidden in our system somewhere. And we can no longer hide from those things, especially when hormones are racing, when you're having to deal with all of these extra things that come with having kids and babies and, like you said, the workload doubles because now there's two people that you have to take care of, and
Right.
managing one person was already a struggle. Now managing two, it's even worse. It's so, yeah. So big.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like everything changes, and it's not necessarily for ADHD. It's not necessarily like a specific hormone. It's just those hormonal shifts that changes our brain chemistry. And that's kind of where we get into the like, oh, now I have symptoms that I can't manage. I need help.
Yeah. So how do we manage those things, and what are some of the systems that you have put in place to support, those different areas of our brain that really need support?
Yeah. So I'll just speak for me, and my client, I do this all the time with clients, but I'll speak to my story. For me, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So I need a paper calendar on the wall that both my husband and I can see. I put a whiteboard in our dining room so that I can brain dump everything that needs to be done. Because I found that if I brain dump and do that, my husband actually takes over some of it and I can delegate, and that helps take some of the load off of my plate. I try to, at some point during my day, and this is the benefit of having your own business, right? Is laying down in my dark bedroom with my noise machine on, just to kind of reset my nervous system and give my brain a chance to like be squirrely if it needs to. Because I spend all day trying to rein it in, trying to focus. And then at some point, it's like, okay, I'm so exhausted from doing that I just need like 10, 15 minutes. I never ever sleep, but it's just my way of being like, okay, I need no input and I just need to let my brain go. And once I get up, I feel so much better. So little changes like that. Even simple things like when I bought my new phone, I put a red phone case on it so that way I can see it. So I kept putting it down. It had this really cute bird cover and I kept putting it down on my granite countertop and it was invisible to me. And so I would spend so much time looking for my phone. And so I was like, when I got this one, I was like, oh no, I didn't go for neon. I was close, but I at least went for red. And now it's so much easier for me to see, either in my purse or around the house. So simple things like that. It's not like you have to change everything about your life, but are there simple things around specific, I don't even want to say struggles, but where do you get hung up with your ADHD and how then can you problem solve around it? And that's really, there's no, every person with ADHD has to use these strategies because every brain, as we know, is not alike. So those are just some of the strategies that I've found have been helping me. But I do a lot of work with clients about managing to-do lists and trying to figure out what's important and urgent versus what really doesn't need to be done right now. Time management. So figuring out how long things take. And this is really helpful for business because sometimes I need to remind myself like, okay, you're going to spend a half an hour and do this every Monday. And if I can hold myself to that and I see it in my calendar, it's so much easier than I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the week. So that clutter is another big thing that a lot of ADHD moms struggle with. So it can be even like setting up systems in your home. Like, hey, if you bring the mail and you stick it on the counter and then it's gone to you until it piles up so much it bothers you, like how can we get your mail in the house over the trash can or recycle bin and opened before it even hits the kitchen counter, right? So it's those kind of things like backing up what is automatic for us and saying, okay, just because you've always done it this way doesn't necessarily mean it's working and doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be something else you can try.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important to just like have recognition of our own like patterns and cycles and behaviors, because I feel like we just like get stuck in those and it's kind of hard to pull ourselves out of them and kind of reteach our brain how to do things in a new way. I know for me, I have massive time blindness.
Yep.
So I have like alarms set for everything on my phone all the time. I have a paper calendar and I have reminders on my computer. Because if I
Yeah.
don't have 3 separate ways of reminding myself, I'll, like, even, like, shut off my alarm, and then, like, 2 minutes later, I'm already on to something else, and then I have to remind myself in another way. And so
Yeah.
just, like, having systems and having more systems to support the system sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. And, it all may sound ridiculous to someone who doesn't have a brain that needs that, but hey, if that was working for you, like,
Yeah.
who cares, right? That's what you found that you need, and that is a system that works for you. So,
Yep. Well, and I think it's important to talk about setting boundaries with ourselves and others too
Mhm.
around our systems and processes and things because it can be hard when you're living with a spouse, you have kids, you have to work with other people, all of those things, friends that require things. It can be hard as a person with a brain that works that way to kind of like, well, if I do that, then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and it kind of all gets thrown out the window.
Yeah, I think boundaries are so important. I mean, not just as moms and as women, but as women with ADHD, especially also if we're owning our own business too, like being able to set those boundaries and asking for what we need is really, really important. And figuring out like, hey, is something going to be an energy suck? And if it is, you only have so much bandwidth that you're willing to put to that, right? And so saying no, learning to say no, learning to delegate, learning to kind of say, okay, here are my boundaries, and I can't do this or that, or I need this in order to succeed is like super duper duper important. Absolutely.
I love that you mentioned like the brain dump and using that as a means of delegation with your husband. I love that. I think that's so important to have like that level of communication to be like, I have a million things, and right now that million things is like flying at me every which way, and I don't know where to start and I don't know what to do. And sometimes, like, just having that person that can be like, okay, I'll take this one away, I'll take this one away, maybe start here with this one or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think early on, I guess before my diagnosis, I would ask my husband like, "What's on your mind?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing." I was like, "Literally nothing." He's like, "No." I was like, "Okay, so I'm just going to tell you what's on my brain right now, and here are all the things that I'm thinking about." And it's just like getting it out helps. Yeah, like you said, like helps with delegation. Also helps the person you're living with or working with realize what's going on in your brain all the time, right? Because I think as moms, as business owners, we are always trying to anticipate the needs of others. And so just kind of being like, hey, I need to not anticipate and just put this out there and brain dump kind of helps run the energy out of the brain squirrel.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good. Are there any other like daily kind of things that you do to really help set your days up for success to make sure that like everything that you actually need to get done gets done? Um, I know you mentioned like when you work with clients doing the important and urgent kind of things.
Mhm.
I think that is amazing because especially in today's world, I feel like we're always getting information from everywhere all the time, and it can get
Yeah.
really overwhelming. And I notice like especially with like emails or like phone notifications or whatever, if it goes off, I'm immediately pulled from whatever it was that I'm doing into
Yes.
whatever is flying
Yeah.
at me at that moment.
Exactly. And it's so hard then to like come back and get into what you were doing.
Mhm.
So, I mean, sometimes I'll just throw my do not disturb on my phone and just work if that's what I need to be doing. For me, another thing that I've really enjoyed about being my own boss is working my schedule around my focus and energy. So, like for me, I can write and create really well in the mornings. And so that's when I tend to do that. If I were to, fill my mornings up with client work and then leave the rest until the afternoon, it would be so much more of a struggle. And so kind of figuring out when are your energy times. Like some people get really energized, before bed and late at night. That's fine. I'm not one of them. Some people like just need to figure out, where do you do the heavy lifting? Where you do the heavy mental lifting? When are you the most able to get the most done? and then putting all of your hard things there. And then saving the parts that are kind of more menial or don't take as much brain power for the times of the day that you know they're not your best.
I love that. I love how you talked about breaking up your day too with like your just like a kind of like brain calm down time.
Yep.
I do something that I would say kind of is the same idea, but I go and work out in the middle of my day, and it's that same thing. It's like that reset for my brain where I can just go get out all of my energy, like, and I think my best when I'm at the gym because I like am not being inundated with all of the other things. I'm focused
Right.
solely in that moment on my lifting. And so I do my best thinking there. But same idea, just like
Yeah,
that
and that's
break in the middle
perfect.
of your day.
Right. Right. And whether it's like exercise is excellent for ADHD, and then the brain. And so, and everything else, but that's something that can be really, really helpful. Like when you hit that like afternoon slump, or you're going to hit the afternoon slump, schedule your workout then. And I think that's a great way of doing the same thing. Yeah.
How do you work as a mom with ADHD? Because our kids, bless them, but they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and they're not going to work around mom's needs
Right.
or wants 90% of the time. How do you work with that?
Let's see. It's getting a little bit easier as my son is getting older. He's 4 right now. We just started doing visual calendars or visual schedules with him. And that helps me too, to kind of plan out the day. And so I see, okay, I don't have to make all the decisions of what we're going to do next. I can just make it once in the morning and then we just follow it. That can be really, really helpful. And then I'm also modeling for my son, like, okay, mommy's brain, I need a break right now, or that's too loud. Can you do that a little more quietly? Those types of things I'm starting to be able to say like, okay, I need to go take a break. And that doesn't mean I'm abandoning you. It's just like, I need to go stare out the window for a couple minutes until I'm good. So things like that are helpful. I think also for me, like I tend to get really overstimulated, like in crowded places that are noisy. And so I tend to take him to the places that I can be at my best. So that's, I think, of course he would probably benefit from all sorts of other things, but, I kind of be making his experience the best it can be with my brain, because if I'm overstimulated, I'm going to start getting really irritable and grouchy and grumpy. And then he's going to start getting grouchy and grumpy. And then you know where that goes. So that's another thing I do. Also doing the things that I want to do. So like my husband and I are big bird watchers. And since our son was born, we'd taken him on our walks. We didn't give that up. And so, he might not love it 100% of the time, but that gives us, as adults, something to refill our cup, even if we're not alone, right? It's self-care, but we're not doing it alone. Another thing I think is huge is meal planning. And that's a really, really tricky thing for moms with ADHD. It's a lot of decisions that all need to happen, right? It's like, okay, so who's around? What's the schedule? What's in the fridge? What am I going to cook? Is it raining outside? So can we grill? Is it too hot to cook? So it's like so many decisions. And so really blocking those ahead of time and just doing my meal planning for the week one day. And then I don't have to make that decision for the rest of the week because I know what we bought. I know that's what's going to come. And so something like that can be really helpful if you can pre-make decisions so that when you know that you're kind of like at the end of your day, you're not in that witching hour being like, what are we going to cook for dinner? Because then it's harder to make that decision. It's harder to make a good decision when, you're already
I get stuck in that analysis paralysis. I'm like, oh, there's so many decisions to make, and I've already made so many that I just can't do it anymore.
Exactly. Sometimes, like, when I ask my husband, like, it's takeout night, where are you going to get takeout from? He's like, I don't know. And I was like, I just need you to pick. Just pick. I don't want to make the decision. I will go with whatever you will say. Like, it's fine. So it's, trying to figure if you can make those decisions ahead of time, packing your lunch the night before, so you don't have to figure that out on your way out the door. Setting your and your kids' outfits out the night before, so that way you're not, trying to rush out the door, making all those decisions. Like, where are those places that you can really take care of your future self, so that you're not in those situations where you're overstimulated and it's difficult to make? Because I think like the ADHD paralysis is a thing. Like, our brain just kind of gets so much input and so many choices that we just freeze. And then no choices are made.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, default ones are made, and maybe those aren't our favorite options looking back. Right.
Right.
So the more things that you can do in bulk ahead of time, the better.
Yeah. I love that you talked about like involving your son and setting boundaries with him, because that's something I've done with my son since he was very young. And I think kids are way more understanding than we tend to give them credit for. And especially if you start out with them young doing those things, like it just becomes normal to them and part of their day-to-day, programming as well. Like my son goes to the gym with me every time, and it's normal to him. He's like best friends with all the people in there. He knows like
Awesome.
what workouts he's gonna do, but like that's my mom time. When we go shopping, I also get overstimulated in like grocery shopping, but I also
Yep.
hate online shopping. So I tend to wear headphones when we go shopping.
Brilliant.
And he knows that mom needs that, because otherwise I'm going to get overstimulated and it's going to be a mess for both of us. But just like the fact that you create those systems, you implement them, you bring your entire family into that, like it makes it so much better than when you're just trying to do it on your own and handle everything on your own.
Exactly. Because it's a lot. Like to be a mompreneur is like so much all the time, right? Like, because your work is, overlaps with your family life, and hopefully they complement each other, but sometimes they don't. And then, so trying to figure out how you as a mom and a business owner can like help yourself, and just, what do you need? Like, do you need headphones? Do you need, something else similar just to help you? Like, I've taught my son to like take a deep breath, because that's what I need to do when I'm getting a little close to the edge. And so sometimes he'll look at me and goes, "Mommy, I took a deep breath. I feel better." I'm like, great. Okay, now we can get on. Crisis averted.
Our kids always listen and watch and, do those things too. My son is diagnosed with ADHD and has an IEP at school. And so he has like accommodations and things like that. But one of the things that he really struggles with is like the emotional regulation part of that. And so one of the things that we do is I've told him that sage cleanses our energy, helps us relax. We got to take a deep breath as we do it, whatever. So now he will come over to my desk and he will grab this off when he's upset, and he'd be like, "Mom, I need the sage."
Oh,
it's so funny and it's so cute, but like you don't realize like that you're implementing those like thought patterns and things into your kids until they, are able to like actually say it for themselves. And it's kind of crazy.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah, so good. So for you work with a lot of women that are going through this. What are some of the like, kind of things that you continue to see over and over again, either patterns of behavior or like the emotional things that we go through, the shame and other things? And what advice would you give someone who's like kind of at the beginning of recognizing that this might be something that they have going on?
Yeah. The biggest thing I can think of is overwhelm. Whether they're getting a diagnosis, they have a diagnosis, but we tend to get completely overwhelmed and then we freeze. It's that ADHD paralysis. And so it's just taking one little next step and saying, okay, where should I start? I got to start somewhere. Here's one thing that I can do to get towards that goal. Here is instead of that big task, break it down into a million tiny pieces until it feels manageable and less overwhelming. Same thing, with your to-do list, is looking down and saying, okay, how can I, rearrange things in terms of like what's important? Because sometimes our to-do list gets impossibly long, and we get overwhelmed by that. Right. And so we're just like, I just won't do any of it. Right. I'd much rather do this shiny thing over here. So yeah, I think overwhelm, is where a lot of people come to me in that state, of just going, all right, I just need some help. Like, I've tried to do this on my own. I've tried to read books. I've tried to do YouTube, and nothing's sticking. Right. And so just working with women, moms, to figure out like, what are the tiny next steps that you can do to get towards your goal, get towards your to-dos, to get you out of that overwhelm. Because I think that's like the number one thing that I see my clients start with, is just that feeling of something's got to give. And I don't even know where to start.
Well, and I think, like you said at the very beginning, there's this level of shame that comes with that overwhelm, because I feel like as women, we're just expected to be able to do all the things and know how to do all the things and have those perfect systems in place so that nothing ever goes wrong. And then when things do go wrong, when we get into the analysis paralysis and we just can't do anything, or, we forget about something or whatever, we have like this deep-seated shame that comes looking for us. And it's really hard to pull ourselves out of it when we're stuck in that shame cycle.
Exactly. And really, even just having the self-awareness of, okay, I see what's going on here, right? Now I see that I'm starting to overwhelm and freeze. I heard that voice in my head shaming me. Would I ever say that to my child? Would I ever say that to my friend?
Mm-hmm.
Nope. Okay. So rephrase it and try to get into that different tape, because I think our inner critic is our own worst enemy. Right. And I think that, especially if we've been diagnosed late with ADHD, we have been trying to fit our neurodiverse brain into a neurotypical world. And so we might not do things the same way as everybody else does. And that's okay. It's just that our brain works differently. But I think understanding that it's not us, our inherent moral character flaw, but just saying, okay, I'm going to stop comparing myself to others, which I know is really hard in the world of social media. And just, I don't have to sign up for all the things. I don't have to do everything perfectly. It's okay if I do something, I call it C-level work. Like, we know how to do A, we know how to do F. We're really uncomfortable with C-level work, right?
Yeah.
So trying to decide, where are we going to put our energy and our focus, because it's not unlimited. And so what are the things that we need to put in place, either in our family or our business, to give us that space to be able to think clearly and make good decisions and strategies.
I love that. So much good wisdom right there. Well, this has been such an awesome conversation. Where do we find more about you? What programs or coaching do you have available? All of the things.
So yeah, you can find me at Anna Burns Wellness on the socials. My website is annaburnswellness.com. I do offer one-on-one private coaching as well as group coaching programs. And if you go to my website and go to the resources tab, I have a free guide to meal planning for ADHD moms, as well as a free guide to helping manage your time. So
awesome.
Here, there, and everywhere.
Perfect. It's great. And I was checking out her Instagram a little bit before we hopped on, and there's so many great things on there. So free resources all over from her. So go and check out those, and then go and check out her, and hopefully go get some coaching from her, because what a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for coming on and being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I love being able to talk about this stuff. So thanks. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mompreneur podcast. And if you like this episode as much as we did, give us a follow so we can invite you back every Wednesday. And of course, share it on all your socials. Being a confident mompreneur means uncovering your strengths and struggles so you can dive in and learn how your next steps could be your greatest.